Brought to you by Penguin.
The Burning Earth by Sunil Amrith. Read by Esh Alladi. For Ruth, Theodore, and Lydia. Prologue. Dreams of Escape. I had the most thoroughly urban of childhoods in an Asian metropolis that grew vertically. My memories are of harbour lights and darkened movie theatres and air-conditioned shopping malls. I paid little attention to the natural world, though nature seeped into my life unnoticed. To this day, the rain I love is the rain that thrilled me then, rain that arrives abruptly and falls in sheets from stacks of inky afternoon clouds. I believe that whatever time you were born into shapes your perception of humankind vis-à-vis the natural world, writes novelist Annie Proulx. And so my perception rested on separation. I grew up in Singapore, an island city that imported almost all its food and even its water, a city as committed as anywhere on the planet to remaking nature for human ends. From the 1960s to the present day, Singapore's land area has grown by 25%. The country's engineers have conjured land from water, land made from sand dredged from riverbeds, held up with pillars drilled into the sea floor, and then sculpted into highways and parks and public housing, and the world's best airport. Even the climate was moulded to the nation's needs. In a 2009 interview, Lee Kuan Yew, first and longest-serving Prime Minister of Singapore, reflected that air conditioning was a most important invention for us, perhaps one of the signal inventions of history. Lee believed that climate was destiny. Air conditioning had changed the nature of civilization, Lee said, by making development possible in the tropics. As a young person, I was conscious of the idea of sustainability, which entered common use in the 1980s. But I was drawn to study history by what seemed to be the more urgent struggles for political and social freedom that I saw unfolding all around me in the last 2 decades of the 20th century. When nature first touched my writing, it entered unbidden through the archives. Amid the bloody accounting of Malaysia's coroner's court records, I stumbled on detailed descriptions of the neat rows of trees that provided cover for the buried bodies of Indian migrant workers on the rubber plantations in the late 19th century. As I travelled through rural Malaysia to interview retired rubber tappers, I was surprised by how many of the stories they told me were about trees. Once I met a man who had spent his whole life on the plantations. His memories of the terrain were vivid as we walked together, his purposeful strides leading the way, his tall frame forcefully upright at the age of 80. There used to be a tree there, he said. It just refused to be cut down. We all believed a powerful spirit lived in it, so we left it alone. A line from the French historian of the Mediterranean, Fernand Braudel, came to mind. The land, like our skin, is bound to conserve the traces of past wounds. A few years later, in 2012, I spent time in Yangon, Bangkok and Mumbai within the space of a few months. I have always been drawn to the port cities of the Indian Ocean. Their architecture and their many tongues still bear traces of an ancient commercial world, even as their youthful cultures embrace an optimistic future. The romance of sail and spices brought me to study the sea. On this visit, I became aware of new risks. Within recent memory, all 3 cities had faced extreme floods. A monsoon deluge in July 2005 submerged a substantial part of Mumbai. Cyclone Nargis levelled Yangon in 2008, with a toll beyond counting in lives and homes lost. The Bangkok floods of late 2011 broke the fortress of levees that surrounded Thailand's capital, which was no longer able to contain a Chao Phraya river swollen by a summer of unusually heavy rains. In all 3 cities, extreme weather cascaded into political disaster because of misrule. In Mumbai, decades of unregulated construction had paved over the city's natural drainage. In Yangon, a military government clung to power at any cost, denying the scale of the tragedy and shutting out international assistance. In Bangkok, rapid growth had wrecked the mangroves that once held back the waters.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?